Not far from the town, in the shadow of a dense forest, stands the long-abandoned Bright family estate. Its grim facade, which had fascinated me since childhood, now revealed itself before my eyes. The boarded-up windows and the dilapidated building strongly hinted at unwelcome visitors, though of course it had not always been that way. When I was just a naive young boy, I often ventured to see the only ancient house in the area. The Bright family, consisting of old William and his ailing sister Sarah, resided there at the time. While old William was a fairly ordinary elderly gentleman, Sarah truly instilled fear in our still impressionable minds. Afflicted by some ailment that remained unknown to me, her face and body were grotesquely distorted. Like a doll bent in several places, she spent most of her time inside the mansion, rarely venturing outside. But shamefully, we, then full of foolishness, would often hide near the edge of the woods in the hope of catching a glimpse of her. Among the children of our small town, there were numerous rumors about the Bright family, especially Sarah. Perhaps it was the ignorance of that time, or our lack of upbringing, that drove us to continually invent horrifying stories about the unfortunate mansion. What's more, we put our courage to the test by trespassing onto its grounds. And that's precisely what we did on that fateful day. Early in the morning, my old friend Simon and I, who frequently found ourselves in troublesome situations, set off towards the Bright estate once again. As we walked along a narrow path that ran along the edge of the forest, we eagerly anticipated what we might discover this time, perhaps even encountering Sarah herself. I daydreamed about how I would boast to the other kids, showing off my find, whether it was some trinket, an old spoon, or a broken comb. As we neared the place, Simon suddenly pulled me into the bushes and covered my mouth. Old William, slowly hobbling along, was heading towards the woods, seemingly going into town for something. Unable to contain our excitement, since the situation had suddenly become much simpler, we waited until his figure disappeared among the trees. After emerging from our hiding spot, we quickly made our way to the estate's fence. The rusty gate creaked repulsively, but it didn't give away our presence. However, Sarah did not make an appearance. Carefully sneaking inside the house, I couldn't help but notice gruesome paintings hanging on the wall in a long corridor. Portraits of seemingly ordinary people with ghastly grimaces on their faces adorned almost every inch of the corridor. Treading softly and trying to remain unnoticed, we made our way to the second floor. To our great surprise, as we stepped into the first doorway, we saw the ghastly silhouette of Sarah. The woman sat facing the door, gently rocking in her chair. Her emaciated hands caressed what appeared to be a long-dead bird. As soon as she spotted us, she jerked upright. Her face contorted menacingly, and with unexplainable agility, she lunged toward the door. We screamed in terror, hardly knowing how, and found ourselves back outside, ready to escape. But a sudden crash from behind us made us briefly turn around. Sarah's grotesque, twisted body lay sprawled on the steps, her gaze forever locked onto us. Right now, standing before that very same door, I felt an overwhelming sense of shame and regret for the unfortunate Sarah. If not for our foolishness at the time, her life's outcome might have been less tragic. Gathering my courage once more, I crossed the threshold of the long-abandoned mansion. The same lengthy corridor presented itself, now stripped of its eerie paintings. With a few more steps, I suddenly noticed a heap of mutilated carcasses on the decaying floor. Small birds and rodents, just like Sarah's contorted body, lay scattered all around. For a brief moment, fear gripped me, but I quickly dismissed any irrational thoughts. After all, the house was located near the woods and had been empty for some time. Perhaps a fox or some other wild animal had taken up residence. With a heavy sigh, I carefully ascended the creaking stairs to the second floor. Sarah's room, just as it had been several years ago, appeared before me. I tentatively reached for the long rusted doorknob and entered. The old chair, also situated opposite the doorway, greeted me with a slight swaying motion, as if stirred by a gentle breeze. Surveying the room with surprise, I noticed the cleanliness and the absence of dust on the old items. Fear began to grip my mind when a quiet rustling sounded right behind me. Startled, I turned to face the entrance. In the doorframe, an unnatural, contorted figure was on all fours. Her grotesquely bent body, with a crunch, righted itself as she stood on her feet. Sarah smiled unnaturally, dropping a long-dead bird from her mouth. Its blood dripped onto the floor. Catching my terrified gaze and tilting her head unnaturally, Sarah lunged forward.